Greetings and welcome to this edition of
Positronic.
I'm Barry P. Cook. I'm here to talk to you about the latest episode of Stargirl, which was called The Monsters. And as it begins, Cameron's grandmother is looking at a photo album and for some reason is quite upset. She then goes through the house looking for Cameron but can't find him. And when her husband tells her that he went to practice his sculpture, just as she finds a piece of artwork by him, she kind of freaks out because she feels he shouldn't be wasting his time on his art because his responsibility is to his family in her view. Courtney and Pat return home from their adventure with Helix and the Shadow Realm, respectively. And while Pat is consoled by Barbara, Courtney goes to see Yolanda, who is staying in her room, and they reconcile. Pat then explains to Barbara how in the Shadow Realm he saw his dad and how it made him feel as though he's following right in his footsteps, but Barbara assures him that he's not. He then explains what happened with Mike's mother, whom Barbara then suggests Mike should be allowed to see. Speaking of Mike, he and his friend decide that they need to try to find Cindy and help her with whatever she's dealing with. Cameron's art teacher then visits the grandparents, and when he explains that he's concerned that Cameron has quit something that he really cares about, namely art, the grandmother ice spikes him to death right in the chest. At school, Courtney apologizes to the gang for putting Cameron before them and then asks them to support her letting him in on everything. The fact that she's Stargirl, what happened to his dad, etc. Rick is opposed, but when Yolanda supports Courtney, he decides to support her, as does Beth, although he warns her that he thinks it's a mistake. Meanwhile, Paula wants to show Barbara some fight moves at the gym, and Barbara is not really keen on it. But she does tell Paula that she's a good friend, which apparently no one has ever told her before. We then see Mike and his friend again as they get Thunderbolt to help them snoop in Cindy's locker, where they discover a list of her dad's labs that Cindy has apparently checked out, except for one. Courtney goes to talk to Cameron at his house, and at the same time, Beth discovers that the signal from the cameras that they took out last episode is coming from there. And just as Courtney is about to tell Cameron about his dad, the grandmother interrupts, just as Rick shows up and bursts through the door and the wall, telling Courtney that he warned her, at which point the grandmother says the kids will finally die for what they've done. Fighting ensues, and Courtney tries to stop Rick from hurting Cameron, but he slams him to the ground as the grandparents make a break for it, but end up being confronted by Wildcat, who knocks the old lady for a loop, which was kind of funny. Beth finds out from her father, who calls from a burner phone, that her suit can do all kinds of crazy things, which he somehow discovered, if she activates combat mode, which she does, and proceeds to fight with the grandfather. And when she ends up not doing too well, Sportsmaster somehow shows up to help her. The old lady gets back up and freezes Wildcat to the wall as Rick hoists Cameron in the air by the throat, at which point he uses his ice powers to get the better of Rick. The grandmother then tells him that the kids killed his father and urges him to kill Rick, but the grandfather stops him, telling him that his father's raging grief is what led to his death, and that Cameron should not follow in his footsteps, and he urges him not to ignore love as he falls to the ground in cardiac arrest. Beth is then able to use a defibrillator that's built into the gloves of the suit to bring him back. As the episode ends, the boys investigate a location from Cindy's list and encounter a monster there that is apparently called the HUMANITE, and he lets out a huge roar at them just before the episode ends. So I did like this episode. I'm really happy that Courtney and Yolanda have reconciled, and I'm glad that she finally wants to tell Cameron everything that's been going on, because I think that needs to happen. I very much enjoyed the fight sequence. The fight sequences on this show tend to be pretty good, and I'm glad that someone mentioned Cindy. I'm glad that somebody wants to help her, and I'm hoping that that ends up happening. For some reason, we didn't get any further in the mystery of who killed the gambler. That seems to have fallen to the wayside, that plot, and that's kind of not a great thing. I do want to eventually know who killed the gambler, although it looks like it could be this HUMANITE, because it was a very strong creature that did it, and this character seems to be pretty strong, although in the comics they're more mentally strong than physically strong, so I don't know what's happening there. We'll have to see. This was yet another episode where we didn't get to see Courtney in the suit or use the staff, or see anybody in the suit or use the staff, which is kind of a bummer. I do hope they get back to that soon, especially because we now know that this series is not getting a fourth season, which is ridiculous, if you ask me, because I think it's arguably one of the better shows on TV. Now, it's a little over the top. It gets a little saccharine sweet and a little bit melodramatic, but it's got a lot of heart and it's wholesome and it shows young people in a positive light. And it's all about love and seeing the best in people and having hope. And, there's not a lot of that on TV. And so I don't understand why they would cancel the show that has all of that to offer. It just doesn't make any sense. But, it does fit in with exactly what Warner Brothers has been doing lately with the DC properties, which is canceling everything left and right for some crazy reason. So, in that way, it makes sense because it's just what Warner Brothers is doing now. But it doesn't make sense beyond that, and it's really a bit of a bummer. I suppose there's always some hope that it could wind up on HBO Max, but I think that is unlikely, unfortunately. So, I guess we have to be happy that we got the 3 seasons, and there are several episodes left in the season that we're still going to get to see. And I'm hearing from what I've read that they do wrap up the season in a way that ends the show well. So, we have that to look forward to, I guess. But I'm going to get out of here for now. I'll be back to review the next episode after it airs. Until I return, I wish you peace and long life.